throughout the NAFTA negotiations, which were contentious at times, absolutely, we remained focused on the things that really matter, and because of that, we've come through it with a very strong and positive relationship with the United States, and indeed are moving forward on the ratification of an accord that will secure this important relationship for years to come.
Another trip to Washington for the Prime Minister, this time ratifying the new NAFTA deal, and tensions with China top of mind. So did both leaders get what they wanted out of that? The House of Commons is now adjourned for summer break. And thankfully it's Thursday and time for At Issue. And because this is one of our last ones, everyone is here with me in Toronto tonight. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj, and Paul Wells. So good to see you all. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Let's start with that meeting between Trump and Trudeau. A lot has happened if you think about where we were this time last year between these two. And it does seem like we've reached some sort of maybe détente. I don't want to speak too soon, but Andrew, why don't you start? What did you make of, or where would you say the relationship, I guess, is at this point?
The relationship is several months before an election. And I think that's mostly what this is about. Ostensibly it was about, and probably some extent was about Trudeau giving some support on NAFTA, Trump giving some support on these Canadian citizens held in China. But I think a large part of this is not only the Prime Minister reminding everyone he's the Prime Minister, he gets to go and meet with foreign leaders, but I think giving a sense of, okay, the relationship is under control, it's in relatively stable condition. Canadians don't like Trump. They don't want our Prime Ministers to be cozy with any president, particularly this one, but they do want to know that the relationship is being managed professionally, and I think this was designed to convey that message.
Just say more stability, that's a good idea, I guess.
Yes, and on the handling of the NAFTA file and the Trump relationship, I think that the Prime Minister is not totally bulletproof, but pretty much because of the coalition he built. It's really hard from the left or the right to shoot at him when serious people on the left and the right believe that this new NAFTA deal is a good thing. On the other hand, I think President Trump does want Congress to sign off on his deal, and probably believes that Justin Trudeau is an asset, and talking to the Democrats on that. I also suspect, but that's just me, that maybe Trump likes Trudeau a bit better now that Trudeau is not so high on his popularity chart.
Paul?
You're right, it's been a heck of a year. They've gone from kind of a bromance to really about a year ago, the extraordinary fireworks around the Charlevoix summit. And now something more like what presidents usually think of when they think of the Canadian Prime Minister, which is, oh yes, the Canadians.
We'll let them in.
Yeah. I do think that Justin Trudeau does not rate very high on the president's list of biggest problems, and he was happy for a relatively easy morning at the office. Not as easy as when he stays home to watch TV and tweet, but close. And I don't think a lot of major files got advanced in important ways, but he got an engagement from the president to take the China file to Xi Jinping, and they've had fantastic meetings. They've had really awful meetings. This was somewhere in between.
Althea?
Well, I agree with basically everything that was said. I think that they both need each other, and that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. But I will note that there was still a moment during their meeting in the Oval Office where the president couldn't help but needle the Prime Minister. Oh, you're having trouble get a meeting with the Chinese president? Oh, right. Are you, Justin? Well, if you need help and you ask me, I'll help you. Yeah. You know, I don't think he really needed to phrase the request in that way, but he just couldn't help himself. Obviously, I think the Liberal government is playing it pretty safe, to Chantal's point, but they are also a very... they don't want to be seen as moving the yardstick too quickly. And while it's very unlikely that this gets done before there is an election, the word has gone out to members of Parliament that if a deal is done in Washington, they will be coming back to the House of Commons to vote for this thing.
Okay, I'm not going to play the clip because I want to have more time of you talking and less of clips. Andrew Scheer's big climate plan announcement, it was long awaited, many pages, as you pointed out many times in your column. But did it do what it was supposed to do? Show that the party is taking it seriously and that it's something that is credible, that Canadians can buy into? Chantal, you start.
I don't think so. I think it fell well short of that. And today, some conservatives were trying to compare yesterday's plan to Trudeau's launch of this environmental platform in 2015. Well, the fact is that the discussion has evolved since then, and the yardstick has moved. So it might have compared okay with the Liberal platform of 2015, but it looked like nothing happened over the past 4 years, and this was a plan that had more blanks to fill than answers to questions. So it doesn't really qualify as a solid alternative plan.
What do you think?
On the merits, absolutely. It's ridiculous. It's not even a plan. There's no targets, there's no standards, there's no costing. It's just...
Well, they say that's going to come at some point.
Well, maybe we'll see. But it's also taking a particularly high-cost route to it. So if you were analyzing it as policy, it's ridiculous. If you're analyzing it as it's a plan that he can wave at a particular segment of the electorate that doesn't really care all that much about climate change, but wants to know that people are somewhere in the ballpark of reasonable people who don't deny that it's happening, but don't want to pay very much for it, all those kinds of messages. So it says to some voters, it says, I'm just sensible enough to do something about this. And to other voters, it can go, oh, he's really not going to do anything about it, I don't need to worry. And that segment of voters, those two segments, are the ones that he needs to reach to get that kind of center-right voter. People who aren't necessarily as solid on the environment as maybe they should be, but they want a balancing of the environment and the economy.
Or even those people that in our poll this week that showed that
Exactly.
you know we want you to do something, we just don't want to pay very much for it. We don't want to pay more than Netflix for it.
Even though they will be paying, but
Yes, that's another yes. What did you think?
If you care about the environment, you will not be voting for this plan. But if you want to have a party that signals that it cares about the environment, then possibly you might vote for the Conservatives. I think it is reassuring to a lot of candidates who are knocking on doors in Quebec or in the GTA. At least they have something to talk about. And so check that is done. But Andrew's right, it doesn't have any targets. It doesn't say even what provinces this would apply to. They spend so many pages slagging the Liberals for their plan for letting large emitters off the hook, and their own plan leaves large emitters off the hook for precisely the exact same reasons. It doesn't say how much companies would have to pay.
No.
It doesn't say how many emissions they would be reduced, or even a target on how many emissions would be reduced. In fact, I think most people looking at this would look at Harper's plan from 2007 and say that was more ambitious. So while there's a lot of stuff in the back pages, interesting policies, home retrofit, which is really expensive, not sure how much bang for your buck you get there. In terms of policy, if this is your issue, well, you're probably voting Green or another political party, but nobody here is going to find perhaps what they were looking for.
So why bother then? I sort of wonder. I mean,
For the candidates at the
to
door.
fill a blank.
to fill in the blanks.
The Liberals used to say that John Chrétien had his campaign team write a red book for 1992 so that he could say on the campaign trail, I've got a plan, you read it.
Yep.
It was almost the physical personification of what strategists call a shield. This is the same, but there's a broader thing. We've seen example after example recently of governments that come to power without a real plan because they built their whole campaign on how am I going to win the election, not how am I going to govern. If Andrew Scheer becomes prime minister, he will find that his environmental policy is of no help to him. And as Doug Ford could tell him, that turns out to be a problem if you do get elected.
Yeah, he's got no mandate.
Okay, so speaking of Doug Ford, let me play this clip because this was a huge cabinet shuffle a year into governing, and I guess was intended to some way reset the agenda. Here's what Doug Ford had to say about it today.
A continuous improvement, it starts with me. Every one of our cabinet ministers, I feel, have done a good job, but we can always do a better job. I can always do a better job as well, and we're going to.
So you need to go a little faster for this round, but I don't know, what does that tell us about a government and how they are doing to have to do something like that so soon? How did you read it, Paul?
Well, it suggests they get that they're in really bad trouble.
Sure.
It suggests their own polling numbers are not rosier than what we're seeing in the newspapers. I have some advice to these new ministers who've been promoted, Rod Phillips and some of the others. Nobody who got demoted for doing something that the Premier's office didn't like. They all got demoted for cheerfully doing what everyone thought was an excellent idea, which means they need to stop listening to the Premier's office. They need to act like cabinet ministers. They have as much experience, if not more, than the people who are trying to tell them how to act. We need to see judgment brought to bear in their public statements and also in private behind closed doors, because going out and executing what the Senate tells you to do hasn't worked well.
I just don't see that happening.
A
though, do you?
premier in a major province that fires a finance minister after a single year will inevitably, if not shatter, at least shake confidence in business circles that this is a serious government. When you have a premier that you're not too sure about, you tend to look to the finance minister to see if there's an
Yes.
adult in the room.
Yes.
Well, whatever you may think of the minister who was
Finelli,
demoted today, the fact is that I couldn't find any examples of a government in a major province in its first year firing the finance minister.
Someone said to me this week, no, it was a Liberal, but someone said, I don't think I don't think they can actually get it back. They've lost their credibility, and I'm not even sure they can get it back. Is this enough to do that?
Well, this plus several years between now
Yeah.
and the next election, so
Yeah.
you never know. But look, the problem isn't Vic Fideli. The problem is the premier.
Yes.
The minister who needs to be shuffled is the one who's actually doing the shuffling. Everybody
He
knew
seemed to
this.
acknowledge
I know,
that.
yeah, he's seeing, but I don't think he's going.
Everybody knew this beforehand. We knew that he was a rolling train wreck. He was able to sort of fluke his way into the leadership of the party. He won the election not because of him, but in spite of him. But they're stuck with him. And our system, unfortunately, gives all the power to one person. And this person in particular has very poor judgment, is demonstrated on multiple occasions. And they're a year into their term, and they're in a terrible state, and it's mostly because of his decisions.
Although the former Liberal strategist Scott Reid, I saw today, tweeted, this is to try and distract you, but what it might end up doing is stoking disloyalty. And you wonder whether people will be upset that they got, pushed and then start to sharpen knives and do the rest of it. I don't know.
Honestly, I think from the start, this government could have used more disloyalty.
To him, you mean?
People need to say. People need to say to people, "Look, you just gave me a stupid idea, and I won't do it."
Yeah.
And on firing finance minister, I could think of one government that we all work close to that could have stood to get rid of its finance minister before now, in Ottawa.
He's just going to leave that out there. You get the last word on
I'm
that.
just going to end by saying I think that what they tried to do is basically change the spokespeople. And they have put in some, like Stephen Lecce is not very experienced,
No.
brand rookie new MP, but the communications worked for Harper and was pretty good at it. But the problem is not the spokesperson, the problem is the policy.
Yeah.
And so hopefully they have a few months. The legislature's not
yeah.
sitting to get briefed on their documents.
A
Maybe
lot of
they come
months.
back
And
with
the problem is
something else in November.
The problem, to come back to a point we were making earlier, is he ran on a platform of saying we won't have to make any cuts.
He
It'll
said
all
this was
just be
Nobody
easy.
would lose their job.
No one will lose their job.
Yeah.
So people, I guess, bought that. They shouldn't have, but they did. And so when you then come in and make a bunch of cuts and fire a bunch of people, no kidding, people are going to be mad.
I mean, if the Liberals could organize a putsch that was almost successful against Jean Chrétien, who knew what he was doing and who had won a majority for them for the third time in a row, I don't discount the possibility that this could get even messier and that knives will be out for the Premier.
Okay, let's leave it there. Thanks, everybody. Before we go, be sure to subscribe to At Issue, the podcast, for extra content. This week, we're going to talk about some reporting that my colleague Evan Dyer did around these new allegations about things Conservative MP Michael Cooper said. Look for it on iTunes, in your major podcast app, our website, cbcnews.ca/thenational.